Well, we finally have reached the end of this saga of the display cabinet. Uh, if you've been following this, you know that I kind of acclimated the wood in my living room. I did all the layout on the dining room table. It's always nice to work in air conditioning when you can. I would take the wood out to my shop, obviously, and cut it on the table saw or the chop saw or whatever, and then bring it back in, do some dry assembly. I use the domino system for the joints, and I could kind of lay it out and play with it a little bit, get it where I was happy with it, and then do the glue up on the frame so that I had that basically the way I wanted it. Now this is a composite video, so we're going to use some pre-recorded information here.
Well, we've moved the display cabinet framing out here and by the front porch so that I can do some sanding, and I'm going to put some wood conditioner on it to kind of prevent it from blotching. I've done some test samples of this mahogany, and it does tend to blotch a little bit, and so I'm putting the conditioner on. I did try the conditioner out on the sample and then went back and put on some red mahogany Minwax stain, and it looks really good, so I think that's what I'm going to go with. So I've been out here doing that part of the job that I probably hate the most, and that's sanding. Started out with a fairly coarse grit, working up to 320 or maybe 220. I don't know if I'll go all the way to 320, probably 220. And then after I get everything fixed up fairly well, and I'm happy with getting all the, maybe some of the stray glue off, and getting it to the point that I'm happy with that, then I'll go ahead and use 320 sandpaper to kind of finish it off.
As a side note, I did use 220.
What I've done to kind of speed things along here with the sanding is I've got two battery powered orbital sanders charged up. I've got a coarser sandpaper grit on one and a finer on the other, so it kind of allows me to work the one and then go back and work the other, and not have to go back out in the garage and change out the sandpaper grit. I saw this particular orbital sander demonstrated on one of the tool demonstration YouTube channels. It's a really nice sander. It is very heavy to use, at least compared to some of the other sanders that I've used. It's the rigid. I've got the lithium-ion battery on it that just seems to go and go and go, and I haven't had any problems with those batteries. I get a tremendous amount of use out of them before I ever have to charge them up again. But it is heavy. It's especially on the back side, so it takes a little bit of muscle to handle this thing. Once you have it on the wood and it's working, it's okay. One of the things I've noticed is that with the coarser sandpaper, it just moves right along. When you get to the finer sandpaper, it does seem to vibrate a little bit more, and I don't know if that's because I'm not running it at the right speed, or if it may be just the wood I'm working with. I'm going to play with that a little bit and see if I can't get that to straighten out for future sanding.
Okay, this is a test that I did with some leather. I ended up not doing that laser engraving and just going with some leather panels that I glued on plywood. These panels are going to be inserted in the frame here, so you can see a kind of a test fit here with one of the side panels. So this leather was just attached with contact cement. Okay, this is one of the leather panels. I went ahead and put a couple of copper tacks in the corners just to get a little bit more hold onto the backer board, keep the leather from slipping around. And then I've washed the leather with this Dr. Jackson's leather cleaner, and when that dries sufficiently, then I'm going to apply the conditioner. I've gone ahead and cut the brass rods down to length
which I'm going to use to support the glass shelves that are going to be inserted in the cabinet.
Here you can see some of the embroidery patterns that my wife looked at that we wanted to put on the leather. The reason for this was that it was easier to make an applique with this embroidery system and then put that applique onto the leather. So my wife found a couple of dragonflies, which is kind of an arts and crafts motif, and she embroidered these on some microfiber type material, cut it out, and then ultimately I glued that with super glue onto the leather
What kind
panels.
of fabric did you say this was?
It's a micro suede, kind of an artificial suede.
It matches the leather that we used very closely.
Except I think your leather is more of a burgundy color, and this is
True.
straight like a chocolate brown.
Here you can see the dragonfly cut out. I sprayed it with some clear lacquer to kind of protect it. Here you see it laying on the leather.
I've started staining the cabinet with this red mahogany stain. I've got a lot of work to do on it yet. I've got some areas that are still kind of blotchy. I've distressed the wood a little bit because I want it to look kind of antique-y, and those stresses seem to be working pretty well. This is a brass rod that I've inserted just to show you how that's going to fit into the carcass here, or the framework. And I'm going to leave the end of the brass rod exposed here on the front of the cabinet. I may end up rounding that off a little bit and let it stand a little bit proud. I haven't decided yet. I've got enough of the brass rod embedded in the wood there that I can pull it out a little bit and round it off if I want to make it dome shaped. This is just kind of a dry fit. I've attached the dragonfly to the leather, and I've just kind of got the panel forced in there. I don't have the brass framing put around it or anything, and I still got to clean up around the dragonfly. I stuck this on with thick super glue, and there was some squeeze out, and I'm not sure how I'm going to get that off of that leather without messing up the leather, but I'm going to try some acetone. Hopefully that won't take the dye out of the leather. I'll have to check and see. But anyway, that's kind of what that front panel is going to look like. And of course, it doesn't show the brass framing around the leather yet, but the side panels will have smaller dragonflies centered in them. So I'll report back on this after I get along a little further. Well, I'm finally back to the display cabinet build after taking a fairly long break here. This is the panel that I've glued up for the bottom shelf out of mahogany. Basically actually planed and then jointed the edges and glued up these two panels to make the larger shelf. The piece that you see here was a cutoff that I made before I planed it down to thickness. And I'm going to use this as a piece of edging on the front of the panel when the shelf is installed. So we'll get back to you with the progress is made. Okay, this is an update on the display cabinet. I've got the leather panels installed, and I've got the brass molding around the leather, and this is just brass rods, bar stock. I've got the shelf, bottom shelf installed. I've still got to put some molding around that. I've started putting the brass rods in to support the shelves, but I've got several more of those to do. I'm actually going to double those rods up for each shelf to get a little bit more support. And then I've got to put a back on this. My wife's decided that she wants to put a mirror in this on the back, so I'm going to put some 1/4-inch plywood, birch plywood, on the back of this to install the mirror on. And then it'll have glass sides. I've got the wood now to prepare the molding that'll go around the glass. And so I'm getting a little closer to the end. I've talked to the glass company about getting some shelves made and in the mirror, and it looks like that's not going to be a difficult thing. The shelves I'm going to get are going to be a little thicker and are going to have a beveled front edge. So instead of sanding it, they're probably going to have to sand off and have those done specially. We've got the little dragonfly applique on the front leather panel that my wife did on the embroidery machine. So we're making a little bit more progress, and I'll get back to you when we're done.
Okay, the decision was made not to put glass panels on, and you'll see in a future picture here that I actually went with wood slats in a mission style. Also didn't put molding around the bottom shelf. I ended up adding some brass rods to accent that bottom shelf. This is where the plywood's being put on the back of the display cabinet. This is the lighting system that I put in on the underside of the top panel. Used LEDs, put an acrylic lens in at the top, and what I'm doing here is making the brass pegs that I'm going to use to hold the wood slats.
Got it?
Mm-hmm.
I cut each peg off with one of these Merlin 2s with a cutoff wheel. In the next picture, you're going to see me taking this over to the disc sander to round off that end of the peg that's cut, which is kind of ragged. That didn't work real well. It wasn't real safe to do that, trying to hold that with the pliers. So ultimately, I ended up taking each of those pegs and just using the Merlin system to round off that edge. These are some carbles that I decided to add around the top edge of the cabinet. As I mentioned earlier, this whole design kind of evolved. I started out with a set of plans, but then adjusted things as I went along. So you're looking at the slats here with the brass pegs.
Well, it has been a while since I've updated the cabinet rebuild.
This is a jig that I use to help locate each of the slats on the side of the display cabinet. You can't see it, but there's some marks on that piece of plywood that's taped on there to help me line up those various slats. I actually pin nailed those on and then went back and drilled on through some pre-drilled holes into the main frame so that I could, or the main rail, so that I could then put the brass plug in. And there's a brass plug at the top and the bottom of each of those slats. I didn't use two brass rods to support the glass shelves. As it turned out, one rod was sufficient. You can see the brass rods there. This is a view from the front. I don't have all the slats installed over on the right side. And again, there were some brass rods added for a little bit more accent. Probably got way too much brass on this cabinet. That's what it looks like with the light on. And now I've got the mirror installed, and I'm putting the glass shelves in. And my wife's already started to put some things on the glass shelves. She has some antique quilts that her great-grandmother and mother made.